Hey guys, Miss Paige here, and today we're going to talk about culture. What is culture? Why does it matter? And how it affects us. Our world is huge and full of amazing places. Each of these places is filled with different kinds of people, traditions, music, and food. These differences are what make our world beautiful and an interesting place to live and explore. Have you ever been to a different country? If so, you may have noticed some differences in how the people in that country speak, how they dress, what kind of food they eat, or maybe even how they act. This is because every place around the globe has a different culture. Culture is what sets us apart from others. The word culture means the way of a life of a group of people. In other words, what makes different groups of people, well, different. These differences can come from many places, but often they come from a person's heritage or background, like where their family's from. For instance, my family is Native American. We're from a Native American tribe called the Cherokee. We look and act like most other people in America, but there are differences that may sound silly to you guys or to other people that don't understand our culture. For instance, I grew up calling God the Great Spirit rather than calling them just God. I still went to the same churches as everybody else, but in my family, the word God was just replaced with the word Great Spirit. During the summers, my family would always drive up to the reservation in Oklahoma and go visit our family. Often there were songs and dances and even a different language that you may not have ever heard, and you might not hear anywhere else except for that one place. For instance, some differences is here's a picture of, that's me, and my cousin, my mom, and my aunt wearing some traditional Native American clothing. They look kind of like costumes, but to us they were important. The colors, the fringe detailing, that's all part of our heritage. Those colors mean something to our family. They might look silly to others, but to us that's what's important. It's important to understand culture so that you can respect these differences and traditions that are important to the people who practice them. So let's go ahead and talk about that word, culture. Like I said earlier, the word culture means the way of life of a certain group of people. Think about it like an iceberg. You only ever see the tip of the iceberg, but underneath the surface, it's much larger. It's the same way with culture. You may only see a person's clothing, hear what music they listen to, or what language they speak, maybe what kind of food they eat, or holidays they celebrate, all of those little things that you might see in everyday life. But there's so much more to culture than that. It's a person's religious beliefs, where their family originally came from, and the rules that they must follow in their family, and also so much more. Let's look at some different cultures and some differences that you might see from your own.
The first thing I'm going to talk about is Muslim or Islamic culture. Islam is actually a religion, and you can see right there their crescent moon and star, that's their religious symbol. So much like we would have a cross in our churches, they have this symbol. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this head covering that this woman is wearing. It's called a hijab. And the hijab is a covering that women wear over their hair to cover up that part of their body. Sometimes they wear it over their mouth and nose area as well. It just depends. And that's another thing from their culture. You see the little boy praying right there. Their prayer looks different than a lot of ours, and they have multiple prayers a day. So that's another difference that you might see in their culture. And the last thing is Ramadan, which is a holiday that is celebrated actually right now, and it involves them fasting. And what that means is they don't eat when the sun comes up. They don't eat from the time that the sun comes up until the sun goes down. They fast all day long, and that's just part of the way that they observe that holiday. And then after the sun goes down, they have a big feast with their family. So these are just a few things that are different about Muslim or Islamic culture that you might see that are different than what you do or celebrate. The next culture that we're going to talk about is Hispanic culture. Hispanic culture comes from Central America and some parts of Latin America, and well, us living here in Texas, we see a lot of that since we're so close to the border. Some things about Hispanic culture that you might notice are that their art, including dance and music, is very vibrant. You'll see lots and lots of colors in their art, as well as some of the clothing that they wear, especially for their traditional dances. And their music is very upbeat. The next thing you might notice that's different is they speak a different language. They speak Spanish. And also the food that they eat might look a little different than traditional American food. So that's one thing that's really big here in Texas is Mexican food or Tex-Mex. So you can see an example of that in the picture right there. And their celebrations are a little bit different than ours. Here in America, we celebrate a Hispanic holiday called Cinco de Mayo, which was a Mexican celebration for when they defeated the French during a war. So that's just a little bit about Hispanic culture. Next up, we're going to talk about Asian culture. Asian culture comes from, you guessed it, countries in Asia. Countries like Japan, China, and Korea. One thing that is interesting about Asian culture is that it is very heavily influenced by the color red. You'll often see that in their clothing, you'll see it on their flags, and you'll also see it in a lot of their decorations for their celebrations. You can see on the picture that there is, under art, there is one of their traditional dragon dances being shown. For food, their food often has noodles and rice and other delicious, wonderful things, and lots of vegetables. You can see the Lunar New Year celebration down below and all the red lanterns, as well as the last thing is language. They have a completely different alphabet than us. Their letters don't look anything like us, so that's another very, very big difference. Their language sounds completely different than our language. Next, moving on to African American culture, or what's known as Black culture. African American culture is very heavily rooted in their traditions and customs from Africa. So when the slave trade was happening and Africans were coming over into America and assimilating into our culture, they kept some of those traditions, and that's very heavily rooted into their time during slavery. You can see in the first picture art. It shows a lot of very famous Black musicians. Their music is very, very important to them, and jazz music is huge, something that has been influenced, as well as hip hop and R&B. The next picture, you can see soul food, lots of Southern style food, greens, vegetables, and things like that. Traditions. This is a picture showing a couple that's getting married, and what they're doing is jumping the broom, and that's a tradition that dates back to slave times. And then last, Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a Texas holiday, actually, that celebrates the day that slaves in Texas found out that they had been freed, because they actually did not find out when the Emancipation Proclamation was put in force, but they found out months later. So they were in slavery months after everybody else in the world was. Last, we're going to talk about Native American culture, and that is my culture, so I know quite a bit about it. You can see in the picture where it says art that this is showing some of their traditional dances, probably at a powwow. That's a Native American gathering, and they still have powwows even today. Food, I chose a picture of traditional fry bread, which is a food that has been made for years and years and years in the Native American culture. The next one says language. What's not very well known is that there are Native American languages, such as Cherokee, that are still spoken today in America, and they sound completely different than our language. And the last one is music, and that is showing a traditional drum, Native American drum, made out of a tree stump. There are so many different cultures around the world and even here in America. So I just hit on a few, but I wanted to also talk about some that you're more familiar with. So the first picture shows Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a tradition. It's a cultural tradition here in America. It's not celebrated anywhere else in the world. So I wanted to show a picture of that, showing that our culture is also very different and unusual to people in other countries. So that's our Thanksgiving is one of the holidays that we celebrate here in America. Down below you can see the St. Patrick's Day parade, people, Irish Americans walking in that. Above that you can see German Americans showing their heritage by doing some traditional German dancing. And finally down at the bottom, one that you're most likely familiar with, and that is Mardi Gras. That's something that's only celebrated in the South. So that's another cultural celebration that we do here in America. I hope you guys have learned a lot and enjoyed learning about different cultures. And remember, it's so, so important that you respect other people's cultures and differences, because it's something that's important to them, and it is something that is wonderful and beautiful and makes our world interesting. Have a great day, guys.